Today, I'm going to be continuing with the second part of a four-part series that we are exploring about habits of the heart, Avodah Balev, the Jewish spiritual practices of the heart related to life in a democratic society that are also grounding us and relating us to the themes of Sukkot. So I'll be teaching and leading the sit for the next 25 minutes. And then at the end, we'll have a chance for those who are saying Kaddish to do so, the memorial prayer for those who are mourning loved ones. And then we'll have a chance, as always, of about 15 minutes afterwards for conversation and reflection. And we'd love to hear from you, questions, and your experience with the sit. So I think that's all of our preliminaries. Okay. So I'll invite you once again, just to allow ourselves to arrive. Assume a meditation posture that is upright and dignified. You can feel invited to soften your gaze or close your eyes. Please let me know if there's any sound problems. We're broadcasting from my sukkah outside, and it's a wonderful privilege to be able to do that, but I want to make sure that the sound is good. So if it's not, just let me know. Just allow yourself to arrive in your body. In this moment. Becoming aware of your breath. Perhaps allowing yourself on your exhale to really feel the support of the chair or the ground that you're sitting on. Allowing yourself to be supported. Allowing your da'at, your mind, and your awareness to settle. The practice of yishuv hada'at, of settling the mind. So I'm going to teach a little bit now. If you want to keep your eyes closed, you are welcome to do so. If you want to open them, I'm going to share just a couple of brief teachings. So we're exploring this week 5 habits of the heart that are articulated by one of a teacher of mine personally and a very important teacher for all of us at IJS and many more people, Parker Palmer, in a book that he wrote about 10 years ago called Healing the Heart of Democracy. And yesterday we explored the first 2 of these, about understanding we are all in this together and an appreciation of the value of otherness. We grounded in the notion of chesed and then of loving interconnection that's expressed on the holiday of Sukkot in so many ways. And the notion of human beings all being created in the image of the divine. Today, we're going to focus on the third habit that he talks about here. And I think that in some ways, this is really the core of the whole thing. It's kind of, everything kind of centers on this, maybe. He describes it as an ability to hold tension in life-giving ways. An ability to hold tension in life-giving ways. Our lives are filled with contradictions, he writes. If we fail to hold them creatively, these contradictions will shut us down and take us out of the action. Say that again. Our lives are filled with contradictions. If we fail to hold them creatively, these contradictions will shut us down and take us out of the action. And contradictions here could mean disappointments, could mean all sorts of ways that you might call them hindrances, or things that show up that make it difficult for us, right? Tension can even be a form of suffering, we might say, but it's necessary, right? And it can be beautiful. Tension can be this beautiful, beautiful thing. So he says, when we allow their tensions to expand our hearts, they can open us to new understandings of ourselves and our world, enhancing our lives and allowing us to enhance the lives of others. When we allow these tensions to expand our hearts, they can open us to new understandings of ourselves and our world, enhancing our lives and allowing us to enhance the lives of others. We are imperfect and broken beings who inhabit an imperfect and broken world. It's certainly a message of Sukkot. The genius of the human heart lies in its capacity to use these tensions to generate insight, energy, and new life. The genius of the human heart lies in its capacity to use these tensions to generate insight, energy, and new life. And so, we can just think about the tensions that come up all the time, right? That's the first thing we practice when we gather, is where might we be experiencing tension, and how can we greet that with softness, with chesed, with rachamim, right? Compassion, loving kindness, goodwill, right? How do we bring softness to those tensions? And also, how can we hold those tensions in, I love that he uses the expression, life-giving ways. If we don't hold on, I think here about the lulav, right? And the diversity of the lulav that I know Mark referenced yesterday. But these 4 species that we bring together, palm frond and willow branches and myrtle and a citron, and we bring them together and we hold them, and we could think about, like, we hold them really, really tight, and that doesn't seem so life-giving. You're kind of, shaking the shaking the life out of them. Or we might not take them up at all, right? Like, if we didn't have any tension, it wouldn't work. What we need is a kind of tension that's the right amount of tension, the right amount of pressure, to be able to hold, literally. The Torah says you have to take these species in our hands, and we have to hold them, but hold them in a life-giving way and not a life defeating way. And so how can we use that as a way of approaching the tension of living in a in a democracy in which every human being, in all their varieties and all their shapes and in all of our forms, all of us have equal voice and agency and a right to be here, and power, hopefully, right? That we can distribute power in that way. There's a ton of tension that comes from that all the time, right? And so how can we hold that in a life-giving way, and not in a way that will shut us down? Just 2 more little references, and then we'll practice this. Is the Talmud actually beautifully has quotes Rav Yosef, one of the teachers in the Talmud. It says, "Haro'el lulav b'chalom," somebody who sees a lulav in a dream, "ein lo ela lev echad la'aviv shebashamayim." That person has, what does that mean? If you see a lulav, that person has one heart for their divine parents. Lev echad. Why? Because the word lulav here, the Steinsaltz translation helps us. Lulav is interpreted homiletically as lo lev, right? That person has a heart, right? So the lev is the word for heart in Hebrew. Lo is his. So that person has a heart. The lulav is telling us, right? Remember your heart. Think about the motion of the lulav, that we extend it out into the world and come back to the heart, right? Breathing out and in and out and in. If you listen to my podcast from last week, there's a lulav practice just about that. And then I like to just invoke wonderful American jurist, learned hand, who said the following in this speech from 1944, July 4th, 1944 in Central Park. This is just after American GIs had landed in France, right, D-Day. And he said, liberty lies in the hearts of men and women. Liberty lies in the hearts of men and women. When it dies there, no constitution, no law, no court can even do much to help it. While it lies there, it needs no constitution, no law, no court to save it. And what is this liberty which must lie in the hearts of people? It is not the ruthless, the unbridled will. It is not the freedom to do as one likes. That is the denial of liberty and leads straight to its overthrow. A society in which human beings recognize no check upon their freedom soon becomes a society where freedom is the possession of only a savage few. What then is the spirit of liberty? I cannot define it. I can only tell you my own faith. The spirit of liberty is the spirit which is not too sure that it is right. The spirit of liberty is the spirit which seeks to understand the mind of other men and women. The spirit of liberty is the spirit which weighs their interests alongside its own without bias. The spirit of liberty remembers that not even a sparrow falls to earth unheeded. The spirit of liberty is the spirit of him, and he's getting a little Christian here, but we can interpret it for our own purposes, who taught humankind that lesson it has never learned but never quite forgotten, that there may be a kingdom where the least shall be heard and considered side by side with the greatest. It's a really beautiful speech. But I just bring us back to this notion that the liberty is a habit of the heart. It lies in the habits of people. When it dies there, no constitution, no law, no court can even do much to help it. But while it lies there, it doesn't even need those things to save it. So we'll put the link to the source sheet link is in the chat. But for the next 12 or so minutes, let's just take the opportunity to try to practice this habit of the heart that Parker Palmer talks about, of holding tension in our hearts in life-giving ways. I think that's really what Parker Palmer is saying and what Judge Hand is saying and what Rav Yosef is saying too. Can we imagine holding that lulav and etrog, that diversity and the tension that exists within it in ways that give life, that build upon our curiosity, that are grounded in chesed, in our interconnection, that in moments when we might feel so convicted that we're sure we're right, let's not be too sure that we're right. So as we're sitting together, see if you might notice in your breath how the tension points in breathing are life-giving tension points. The top of our inhale, bottom of our exhale. We hold these tensions in ways that give life to ourselves, for our loved ones, and for our community, and for all the beings with whom we share our communities and our society and our planet. In just a moment, I invite you to open your eyes so we can conclude our practice with 3 cycles of breath. Carry this intention of holding tension in life-giving ways into the rest of our day and the rest of our practice on this holiday and beyond. Eyes have been closed. Your eyes have been closed. I invite you to open them. And if you hear my dog barking in the background, she's joining in. And in just a moment, we'll have a chance to reflect, to hear your questions and reflections on this practice today. But before then, those who are reciting Kaddish, we'd like to make this space available to remember loved ones who we're carrying in mind or heart. We'll put the text. Hope that ambulance gets where it's going. Hold on a second. There we go. The text is up. If you have a someone you are remembering today, please feel welcome to put their name in the chat. And we'll allow you to unmute and we can join together in reciting Kaddish. Yitkadal, Yikdash, Rabba, Le'alma, Mizrach, Yirtei, Yishtei, B'chayechon, Yom Echon, B'chayei, Yisrael, Ba'agala, Karev, Yimru, Amen. Barach, Amen. Barach, Yishabach, Ha'ar, Yitromam, Yitzei, Yadar, Yitalel, Shmei, Ela, Mikol, Birchata, V'shirata, Shbechata, V'nechemata, Yan Ba'alma, Shlama Rabba Min Shemaya, Aleinu, El, Ru, Yaseh Shalom Bimruma, Yaseh Shalom, Aleinu, Yisrael, El Kol Yoshvei Tevet, Amru, Amen.
Amen.
Beautiful. Thank you for joining. You want
Thanks, everyone. Okay, we're just going to remute everybody. Okay, great. All right, well, thank you. And if you need to leave us, say Tchem Shalom, farewell. I hope you can join us. We'll be back here again tomorrow, same time, same channel. Mark will be back as well, but today's his day off from hosting duties. So I'll bring myself back up on the for the conversation. So I'm certainly curious to hear from you how that practice was for you and how this notion of holding tension of life-giving ways resonates for you as a practice for living in a democratic society. What do you find either inviting or challenging about that? I posited that I think this is in some ways kind of the core of the 5 habits that Parker Palmer identifies. I think that so much of it comes down to, how do we respond when we experience that tension? And Parker actually talks about, our hearts can either break open, they break, our hearts break, right? Our hearts break. He evokes, he doesn't quote it, but there's an essay by Bart Giamatti, the former president of Yale and commissioner of baseball, about baseball as a game that'll break your heart, which as a baseball fan, and I'll speak for Mark too, that's certainly true. But Parker Palmer writes about, our hearts break all the time. And the question is, do they break open in life-giving ways, or do they break into a million pieces in sort of shattering ways? right? And can we hold them in such a way that we can help our hearts to break open into new ways of being and relating and showing chesed, into loving kindness and rachamim, compassion for ourselves and for one another. And so I take that to mind. But I'd be very curious to hear from you in the chat about your experience. If you can write it in the chat, that's often best. That's easiest for us if you're able to do that. So Jeff asks, what's the role of suffering? And Eileen points out painfully timely. Yeah. If you're not watching the news about what's happening in our democracy is playing out on the floor of the House of Representatives right now, or some version of it anyway. Republican government certainly is playing out in the small R case, also in the capital R case. But what's the role of suffering, Jeff? Maybe you can say a little bit more about that question. Yeah, just curious to know a little bit more what's behind that. And Susan, yeah, the book Healing the Heart of Democracy is a really wonderful book, and highly encourage it, and noteworthy that he was writing it long before 2016. He was working on that a long time before that. So Blima points out, it seems that if one doesn't accept the contradictions, it's difficult to make life-affirming decisions. Yeah, I would co-sign to that. That's a beautiful way of putting it. And Beryl, I'm so glad to hear. Yeah, I'm so glad to hear that this is helpful for you, this practice today. So Anne has a question. It's hard to hold, and Jeff, I want to come back to your question if you can say a little bit more about what you mean by suffering there, or what your question is about suffering. But Anne's question is, it's hard to hold contradictions in one's heart, even towards loved ones. There's hurt and pain involved and one wants to flee. How to know when to stay and grow or leave and protect oneself? Wow, yeah, great question, Anne. And I think that's a question not only in families, right? How many times in the last number of years, I'm married to a Canadian, and my kids all have Canadian citizenship. And how many times have we had the conversation, maybe we should move to Canada? And I remember actually my now 18-year-old son, when he was probably 10 or 11, and that question coming up, and him saying, I'm not moving, this is my home, and I'm going to stay, and I want to fight for it. I want this to be a place. This is the place that I live. The question of fleeing, of running away from, obviously is not at all a simple question, and in Jewish history, obviously, is a very, very complex and difficult question. So I don't want to make any kind of categorical statement. So, big grains of salt here, obviously. It requires a lot of individual discernment. I think the questions that I ask myself are, is this a form of aversion where it's uncomfortable or even painful what's present, and I just don't want it to be here, so I want to get myself out of here? Am I able to be present with whatever pain or suffering? And maybe, Jeff, this is your question. Can I be present with that? Can I befriend whatever suffering or pain is here in some way, and meet it with some sort of chesed, right? With love, with compassion? Is that possible? It might not be possible. It might be an overwhelming, or a life-threatening level of pain or suffering, in which case that's not possible. But sometimes it is possible. I went for an hour-long Peloton ride this morning. because there wasn't a 45-minute one available that I wanted to do. And all they had was hour ones. I'm like, oh, an hour. I'm going to be so tired at the end of that. But, there's a level of, exhaustion, a level of a little bit of pain that happens. But, I was able to say to myself, oh, I can meet that. And with good feelings, and welcome that tension, right? Literally tension in my legs, in a life-giving way. So, I think that's a form of discernment in relationships that's really hard. And it's not entirely in our control, obviously, either, right? So I don't have a categorical answer, but I can, that's my best attempt. I would love to hear what else, what comes up for other people here as well. Yeah, some really wonderful comments here in the chat as well. Just reading through here. Yeah, one person wrote to me directly. I won't name them because I'm not sure if you meant to write to me directly or in the group, but I'll share at least the reflection that this person is taking this teaching into the ending of a relationship, that they've agreed to a period of silence, but they're beginning to feel that the silence is like holding a lulav too tightly. I'd like to find a decision about how to proceed with more love or compassion, in a more life-giving way. That's beautiful. And I'm glad that that's helping. That metaphor is helpful for you. Gail says, how do we hold contradictions? It makes it so hard to make decisions, right? Again, I think that we actually, I would say, Gail, that we actually have a lot more experience holding contradictions than we might realize. Not everything always lines up perfectly and always makes perfect sense. I'm blessed to be married to my wife for 22 years, and it doesn't always make sense. And there are lots of contradictions, and we've both grown and changed since we were young people, who first met, and how we sustained that relationship. And it's always a bit of, there's conversation and negotiation and honesty and acceptance and challenge, and commitment. But also I feel like I wouldn't have it any other way, right? That I assume, whether it's in that relationship or in my relationship with myself, I'm not the same person I was 25 years ago. And the contradictions within me are ones that actually are some of the most interesting parts, some of the most fascinating parts of myself that I enjoy, but that can make it hard, and that's why we have therapy and practice. Both help with that. Laura says, it's easy to feel powerless amidst current national and international events and atmospheres. I find that performing acts of kindness and connection, as well as receiving from others as much as possible, does generate insight and energy, as Parker Palmer writes. Oh, that's beautiful, Laura. Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Really, for sure. And it's also, again, this is such an important thing, is while what's happening on a national or international level gets so much of our media attention and so much of our focus that way, so much of our lives actually happen in a much more local, even hyper local way, right? And the old mantra of think global, act local, but those things that we do have control over, control in, like, we can exercise our agency in those places. And in fact, so much, I would say the vast majority of life happens in those spaces, right? Much more so. So I wonder about that. So Jeff was referring, okay, great. Just, you were clarifying, in a Buddhist sort of view, about suffering, that the tensions are really a form of suffering, right? And life is full of them. Yes, I think that, in fact, Parker, in another place, in another of his books, his best-selling classic is called The Courage to Teach. And basically anything by Parker Palmer, you should read it, because he's also just he's just a beautiful writer. And he comes out of a Quaker tradition. But I first encountered him through his book called The Courage to Teach. And he has this beautiful description of this moment when you're a teacher, and I'm certainly one, where you put out a question to a class, to a group of people you're teaching, and the question is met with silence. And the silence lasts, it lingers. Nobody's answering the question. 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 15 seconds, and it's starting to get awkward, and you're starting to squirm, and you're getting uncomfortable. And as a young teacher in particular, right, there's like this discomfort with the silence of like, oh shit, what's happening? Oh, excuse me, family show here. But what's happening, right? What's happening? I just put this question out there, and he says, and this was so important to me as a young educator. He says, first of all, you need to trust that people are processing, right? Nobody wants you to fail. Nobody's trying to make you look bad. But that tension that's happening in your heart right there, right? Examine where that tension is coming from. And then he says, and you have to sort of hold on. And that holding on is suffering right there. And you suffer through that to the other point, to the other side, where eventually they will answer the question. And there's a moment of love that happens on the other side of that suffering. And I don't know if that's a Christian or a Buddhist or whatever form of suffering, but it resonates. And I think it's a beautiful teaching about the heart breaking and being able to hold that heartbreak where feeling a sense of, ooh, I'm not feeling validated. And then it's just trusting, oh, I can breathe through this. And then on the other side, it arrives. And I think that that's not only for teachers or educators, that is a practice for all of us, is that give it a little time, right? And we can make it through to the other side. So, so many other great things here that I don't have all the time. Okay, there's one more, it's our last minute. Susan shares, raising a child with neurological disability has required me to learn how to dwell directly in this space, holding the tensions between what is and is not possible for him, our hopes and our uncertainties so much. And yes, we stay focused on our relationship always, and that is the life-affirming, life-giving way we have found to holding the contradictions that just are baked into the cake for him and for us. I would say the same for anybody who's a caregiver for a parent with dementia, right, or spouse, or another loved one, right? All of that resonates so much, personally for me, and that extends really to all of our fellow citizens and residents. My wife and I, in the summertime, I have worked for the last 10 or 12 years at Camp Ramon, Wisconsin, which is an early leader on inclusion for people with disabilities, especially mental disabilities. And the line that we've learned is like, everybody's on the spectrum. It's a spectrum. We're all in a spectrum. And so the things that we learn to exercise towards people we view as having disabilities are really also things that we learn to exercise, habits of the heart, we learn to exercise towards all of us. So I can close with that. And there's a lot more we can say. Luckily, we have tomorrow and Thursday for more practice on this. I really appreciate your thoughts and responses and reflections and questions. And we'll look forward to seeing you tomorrow. One last post of the source sheet there, if you want it. And blessings for the rest of the day. And we'll look forward to seeing you again tomorrow, right, whenever you can join us. So thank you, everybody.